What do you think of the idea of adopting elderly people whose children have died as parents or grandparents, much the same way we adopt children whose parents have died as our own? One day my dad and I saw a lost dog on the side of the road and stopped to help. When we got over the snowbank, we found the owner unconscious on the sidewalk. He had slipped and hit his head, and wasn't in great shape. We called an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital. Luckily, he hadn't been out in the cold too long and suffered little more than a concussion. We visited him once, and kept his dog for 2 or 3 days until he was out of the hospital. After he got home, we brought Phil food daily as he was still dizzy and couldn't stand for long. We noticed that there was never anyone else there, and so we started asking him if we could sit down and eat too. You could tell it was the highlight of his day. He'd get this huge goofy grin on his face, and shared endless stories from earlier years. Phil had led a fascinating life, traveling often. His stories opened up my brain to the possibilities outside our small hamlet. I couldn't believe how much he had done and seen. None of my real grandparents were around and lucid when I was a kid, and it wasn't until much later that I appreciated what a mark Phil's stories and kindness had left on me. My sister's first car was the legendary Philmobile, which he gifted to her when she turned 16. It reeked of German Shepherd. Dog hair flew out the vents when you turned the AC on. The odometer said 36,000, but that didn't count the 200,000 tally before the numbers had rolled back around to zero. I like to think we enriched Phil's last years and gave him somewhat of a redo on family. His own 2 kids were estranged, one visited once, but that's it. He certainly changed our lives, all because my dad has a soft spot for dogs. This is so sweet. This is one of the most wholesome things I have seen in a long time. You need to be showered in gold. This reminded me of a similar story. Growing up, we had an elderly couple across the street that we would help out occasionally. Mr. and Mrs. M. My older brothers would mow their lawn for $0.25 and a hard candy, even though this was the late 90s, haha, and help them out with other odd jobs. I would sell them my chicken eggs for $1 a dozen, and Mrs. M would always give me a dime as tip. I was still pretty young when her husband died. One day we had a good amount of snow, uncharacteristically for our neck of the woods. My mom saw our dog in the neighbor's driveway acting weird. She kept calling him and he wouldn't come. She finally went over to get him and discovered he was standing guard over Mrs. M, who had fallen on her way to the mailbox and couldn't get up. The deep snow was obscuring her. It wasn't long after that she went into an assisted living place. I guess all the years of her feeding our fat golden retriever dog biscuits daily paid off. Haha. Dogs are amazing. I love that you called it Philmobile. We called our grandma's car the go-kart. It was an old Suzuki Swift, probably from the 80s. She had faux fur on the steering wheel and one of those seat coverings with wooden pearls. Whenever she came to pick us up and we spotted her in the distance, one of us would say, "I think that's the go-kart." Thanks for reminding me of that. My grandma loved grandchildren so much, she became part of a program called Rent-A-Grandma for kids, who needed a granny to pick them up from school, etc. So she pretty much had a second family next to us, which kept her busy. I've done this. There's a program for it in my city. I've called my senior daily for almost 2 years. We aren't allowed to have in-person contact to protect the seniors, but I've sent him things. It's been a really great experience. If you look around, there may already be a program in place where you live. Just because of COVID, or is that a rule in general? We don't allow them to touch the old people. Do not touch or feed the old people. LOL. Okay, I understand the reasoning, makes perfect sense. However, this sounds like the old people might bite, which has me in stitches. This thread is so sweet and funny, I love it. This is the first time hearing of such a program, but if I had to guess, it would be to protect the elderly from opportunistic psychopaths. Imagine someone abusive and or manipulative with free access to old people. Doesn't sound great. They most likely want to give the elderly people a sense of security while still able to interact with someone. Old man strength is real. It used to allow contact, but many volunteers were lost in casual wrestling matches. What's the program called? I always hear about old people with estranged kids, and people taking care of them when their kids won't, and how that's a good thing, and an implied shame on you to their kids. But I've never met an adult in my life who refused to talk to their parents without a very good reason for it. I'm glad you got a great role model, and glad he got to have company in his final years regardless, but I do wonder what he did to make his children not want to talk to him. Edit. To be clear, I don't think you were really implying a shame on you to their children, but that sentiment is fairly common in stories like yours in my experience. My mom had a very good reason for cutting off her mother. She really was toxic for her. But she was not toxic to me. My grandma and I had a wonderful relationship, and I have nothing but gratitude that I had that opportunity. I get why my mom couldn't be around her. But their issue just didn't spill over to me. Yep, that's the thing. People show different facets to strangers, outsiders in their own family, and even within family there are tiers. My mom is not toxic, just having her own quirks, but I definitely see her from a very different, and more uncomfortable, angle. Outsiders enjoy her, my brother and I, we have to manage her. I feel like I can be more open with strangers than with family. I don't exactly know why. Obviously do what's best for you, but that may be worth talking to your family about. It took until I was in my early 20s and my sibling was going through a mental health crisis that we were forced to sit down as a family and address the fact that we couldn't be emotionally vulnerable with each other. Still a work in progress, but I'm glad we started the conversation. Again, I don't know your situation and I trust you to do the best for you. Family is what you make it. If you ever need a stranger to talk to, feel free to DM me. I befriended my boyfriend's 85-year-old mother, who had estranged 3 of her 4 kids, all of their spouses, and all 14 grandchildren with her fundamentalist Catholic frothing religion and judgment of everyone, plus having inherited a few million, paying everyone's bills for them, lavishing them with gifts, then hanging her help over their heads, guilting them into interacting with her, plus she had terrible depression and manias of all kinds. When I met her, she was frail, broke, isolated, alone, and had dementia starting. By some weird cosmic coincidence, we realized that my mother grew up on the same block as she did in a city an hour away. They even attended the same hyper-Catholic finishing prep school for young women wanting to become nuns. I was raised in the same crazy religion, and had come to terms with what a culty joke it was many years earlier, so I had an innate sympathy for her, plus I have a soft spot for vulnerable seniors, plus I was underemployed and had a lot of time on my hands. I became her dearest friend, took her in and held her hand when she died at age 87. I found her to be adorable and childlike, and we had lots of genuine laughs, but I know that I would have hated the mentally ill battle axe she was in her younger days. I got to see her sweet side. I missed the decades of horse crap that came before. Abusive parents give themselves permission to be horrible to their own children, but don't give themselves that same permission with strangers, as they don't feel entitled to. So very often they can have wonderful relationships with people that aren't family. But children naturally cleave to their parents, so they don't become estranged unless they're trying to protect themselves, or their own children. I am estranged from both my parents. One died 2 years ago and the other, as far as I know, is still alive. Nobody would ever believe how horribly and deliberately cruel they could be. They present a completely different face to strangers when it serves them. Same. Although my mother didn't cut her off. My grandmother just didn't especially like women unless they were her age or older. My grandmother could be straight up mean to my mother and sister. But she was nice to my brother and me. I have. Some people are just crapheads. I have a family friend, who admittedly is a strong personality, who refuses to talk to his kids, who are my age, mid to late 30s. These 2 guys are grade A douchebags. Won't let him see his grandkids, sold the Christmas presents he bought them on FB, just all around crafty people. I went to school with both of them and they were quintessential bullies. The proverbial hair was when their mother, the sweetest woman I have ever met and was like a second mother to me, passed away after developing mad cow. Neither of them came to the funeral. 300 plus people turned out for this woman and her own sons wouldn't come. Why didn't they come? They had tickets to a football game and didn't want to lose them. I drive the 1 hour plus, every week or 2 to go hang out with their dad, because he deserves to have someone around that cares about him and treats him with respect. Some people are just crafty, even kids. Sure, it definitely happens, but I think the other variety is more common, and it's definitely common enough that we shouldn't look down on kids who won't talk to their elderly parents, even if we don't understand the reasons. There's always reasons on both sides. However, I do know a guy who is estranged from his mother for remarrying, years after his dad had passed, but he wouldn't speak to his mother as her new husband was African. His sister told me this and that their stepdad was actually a really great man who took very good care of their mum. He was just a racist and therefore estranged. There's always reasons. Not splitting hairs in any way, but conceivably, there are just as many crafty kids not talking to their parents as crafty parents and their kids not talking to them. But I do agree the sensation seems to be more how you laid it out. We did something similar with an older couple who lived in a townhouse underneath my grandma. When my grandma passed, my mum still visited them occasionally. When the husband died a few years later, the wife became our nan. She and her husband couldn't have children and had adopted one son who later died from a drug overdose. She was one of those lovely, gentle old Betty White type ladies who really should have had hundreds of grandkids and great-grandkids running around her, but life didn't play out that way for her, so she had us instead. Thanks for giving him the best years he could have asked for in his last days. It must be incredibly lonely to have lived such an interesting life, and have so many stories and wisdom to pass on, but not really having anyone to talk to. I never got to know my grandparents but married into a family with fantastic grandparents. My grandpa-in-law died 2 weeks ago and I'm sad I didn't get to know him longer. He was such a funny, interesting man. He was the kind of guy that made an impression on you, and really truly listened to you. It's probably why 1,400 people live-streamed his funeral. This was a cool Swedish experiment where young and old lived together. Not adoption but interesting cross-generational interactions. Web link. I think my college started doing that a few years after I graduated. They had some students live in a retirement home instead of a dorm. I'm just picturing a load of old folks doing beer pong and keg stands. My grandma visited a few of my younger cousins at college once, and turns out she's a natural at flip cup. I would have loved this. Insert depression. Elderly people in retirement/nursing homes are actually some of the most hilarious, joy-bringing people I've met. I worked at a nursing home and one evening I put on some old music and started dancing with one of the residents. She instantly broke into the hugest smile and started laughing. At the end of the dance she said, "Oh, you are just such a lovely lady," and gave me a big old kiss on the cheek. The only reason nursing homes are depressing is because they are understaffed, underfunded, and the residents don't have any stimulation. If we could normalize cohabitation of young and old, it would be massively beneficial for both parties. So true. My mother was in a nursing home for the better part of 20 years. She was lucid for all but her last few months. She had some great friendships with her terrific nursing staff. She really enjoyed living there. Nursing homes have a negative stigma, and even the best ones aren't perfect. But if you choose wisely and do your homework ahead of time, and you're a regular visitor, choosing a nursing home for a loved one can be a gift to all involved. I'm so glad your mom had a good experience living in a nursing home. The care staff are truly what makes or breaks a resident's experience there, excluding intrinsic cognitive factors, and I'm glad you chose a good one. Thanks for doing what you do. And, yes, I picked a nursing home, too, actually, since we moved, that had been around a long time and had a low staff turnover on purpose. Happy workers usually mean happy residents. Thank you for mentioning this. I work in senior care and any type of senior living still carries a lot of stigma. My grandma moved into an assisted living after she had a stroke. It would have been very difficult to care for her in our home, and she would have been alone a lot. And we got flack for that choice from our family. But at the ALF, she was with people all the time and it gave us the freedom to focus on social and emotional support, rather than worrying about cooking, med management, hygiene, etc. Absolutely can relate. I was my mother's hands-on caregiver for almost 10 years. I'm not qualified to do any of that. It was such a great relief to have her be cared for by people with the willingness and training to do it. I worked in one as well fresh out of high school as a dishwasher. Part of my job was delivering the residents their lunches and most were very happy to see me. I built a rapport with a lot of them and talked to them for a bit while dropping off their meals. The chef got pissed at me for taking too long at delivering lunch and fired me after about 1 year. F him. Oh my god, the dietary aides who actually talk to the residents are amazing. We had one who would take the residents' plates and ask them how they were doing, and then offer them a second dessert. Sorry you got fired. but you changed lives for a few minutes each day, and that's awesome. Ty, I appreciate it. I actually love the job due to the residents. Washing dishes sucked. LOL. You are right and you are awesome. I have had the pleasure of visiting a few handfuls of nursing homes with children to hand out presents to the residents during major holidays. The ones that were set up like a dormitory were much more pleasant. My grandpa thought he was in a dorm. The cool kids collected Beanie Babies, he said. The staff played board games and there was popcorn they offered us in an aviary. I don't see why they aren't all built like that. Took up the same space. Couldn't do any of that this year. I am an orphan and I really love doing that with my group. Going to have to reevaluate that rule where you get a 4.0 for the semester if your roommate dies. That's just a rumor started by Turk and JD. Filling 4 bags will Natty Light and White Claws. Did a whole project on this concept for interior design school. It really makes sense in certain contexts. We need each other. My university has a living space dedicated for intergenerational shared living. It's very inspiring. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.